Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this conference, for everybody taking time out of your busy schedules and your weekend to be a part of something so very important to all of us. Every day in the United States, 150,000 new escort ads are posted online. Every day, 150,000 new escort ads are posted online. And women and children who are being sold for sex against their will are hidden among these ads. And girls like the one I'll be sharing about in a minute here with you. But very few organizations are attempting to prevent this from happening to our children. So it's very encouraging to see so many part of this conference wanting to help. And because we need guardians, we need protectors, we need funders like you to help stop our children from being sexually abused for profit. And all of you are here because you want to make a difference. And I believe you're here not just to hear about child abuse and child exploitation and what we call admiring the problem. You're here because you want to make a difference. You want to be a part of the solution. And one of the ways that you can start making a difference and start being part of the solution is by asking a simple question. And this question was a question that we started Guardian Group with. And every day we ask ourselves this question. And the question is, what if? What if we could put a stop to child trafficking in our lifetime? What if we could put a stop to this? And what if we were placed here for this? What if that's the reason that you came to this conference? And why can't we put a stop to this? What if we placed ourselves in the shoes of the victim, even for a moment? What if this girl was my daughter? What if she was your daughter? And so this question will shape our response, how we look at the problem, and our role in stopping the problem. So I want to tell you about a call I received from a girl. She called Guardian Group one evening, frantic, because she had just escaped from her trafficker and was running down the street to get away from him. She was literally running away from her trafficker, and she found our phone number and called us out of desperation just to get help. And I answered the phone that evening and could hear how distraught and how frightened she was. I directed her to a safe place, and for her, in her situation, that safe place was in some bushes next to an apartment building. And she whispered to me over 2 hours how her trafficker had been abusing her, had been selling her for sex, had been beating her. Because I called the police, when she had called me, I was on the phone with the police department at the same time. But they did not make it a priority because they were responding to a murder. And I told them that if they didn't respond quickly, they would be probably responding to another murder of this girl. And I feared for this girl's life as I talked to her for 2 hours as she hid in the bushes as her trafficker was driving around looking for her. We ultimately were able to get her out of that situation into a safe place, far away from her trafficker and far away from being sold for sex ever again. But I wondered why this wasn't taken more seriously by her parents, by the people that knew that she was missing, by all the people that she came in contact with, whether in the hotels where she was being sold for sex, or all the different people that she came in contact with, even to the groups who had the ability and the tasking to help her. And I concluded that most people don't want to believe that this problem exists, and or they don't know how it exists. So at Guardian Group, with that in mind, we set out to help people understand not only does this exist, but how it exists. Like what I'll be talking about with you in a moment here. Just like you and me, victims of trafficking exist in society. They're all around us, but so are the predators. And so therefore, it's very important to understand that there is a cycle of how a predator takes an innocent child into becoming a victim of abuse. And each victim is subject to this general cycle of exploitation. And so while this cycle isn't the same for every situation, us understanding it will help you help us all to identify what's called indicators. And Charity did a wonderful job talking about the vulnerabilities, and some of those are in here as well. But she did a wonderful job talking about those. And so this will help us to package that up in a sense and understand the red flags and the indicators to keep our loved ones safe and away from this exploitation. There are four phases to the cycle of exploitation. It's recruitment, grooming, introduction, and the automatic maintenance phase. The first phase of this exploitation cycle is called recruitment. This is when a predator looks for a vulnerability within a victim that can be exploited. And this can occur either in person or it can occur online on the internet. And this is where a predator who assesses or recruits potential victims in person, they will most likely spend time at locations where youth hang out. For instance, at schools, malls, coffee shops, parks, where they look for vulnerabilities within young people who are there. We have seen predators outside of elementary school playgrounds looking for vulnerabilities within kids that are vulnerable. Again, some of those vulnerabilities are what Charity talked about, so I'm not going to duplicate that. But so when these people were sitting outside of these elementary school playgrounds, they could see the vulnerability. So when they were able to when the kids were older, a little older, they could be easily identified and targeted and then exploited. And so a common vulnerability is low self-esteem. That was one of the ones that I think we've highlighted as one of the most vulnerable characteristics, where a predator can spot these traits by simply watching how a girl reacts when she's given compliments, where she's called beautiful, where she's given these compliments. And if she lowers her head or shows signs of insecurity, she's potentially a good target. Youth in the runaway, homeless, and foster care populations are also extremely vulnerable to this type of predator. A report came out just 3 days ago that said 1 out of every 3 runaway youth in the United States are likely to become a victim of sex trafficking. This is evidenced by what's referred to as survival sex, or the act of trading your body for a sexual act for a basic human needs, for instance, food or clothing or shelter. And this is also a form of child exploitation. The number one place, though, that predators find their victims, and this is very important for all of us to know, is on social media sites. The amount of information that we just freely offer the world about ourselves makes it much easier for traffickers to find their next victims without even leaving their home. Traffickers search social media sites, they search gaming applications, other internet forums, where they try to spot vulnerabilities, some of those same vulnerabilities, but they do this online. A recent study came out that showed 21% of kids, and these kids were 9 years old to 12 years old. 21%, so that's 1 out of every 5, agreed that it's normal for people their age to share nude photos or nude videos with each other. 1 out of every 5 kids, 9 to 12, thought it was normal to share sexually explicit materials with each other. And of those who shared those, half of those said that they had already shared it with somebody they had never met in real life, and 41% said that they had shared it with someone that was over 18 years old. That should be alarming to us, because we've normalized something that is so outrageous. And so it's really easy for traffickers then to go online and see such things. And when a kid goes online and uses statements and says certain things like, my parents are the worst, or I hate my life, or I'm so over school, this allows a predator to connect with that person, relate with that person, and then offer a way out. And some predators will send out just hundreds of direct messages a day, just hoping for a handful of responses. These messages might include something like, wow, you're beautiful, or I have a problem, can you help me? And so they're reaching out just to lure these kids in. And one way that we could protect our kids from these predators is one, by instilling confidence in our young people. Behaviors such as making eye contact, keeping your head up, being direct when you speak. These are all deterrents to a trafficker. If you're in the online space, teaching a young person to have private accounts, not public accounts. Never posting their frustrations or emotions or their heart online, because that'll make them much less of a target. And it's important also to bring their messages to parents from strangers that they may get these messages from, in order to not respond to those messages and get those messages reported and that young person protected. I've seen somebody as young as 15 and younger as well have people reach out to them that are 30 and 40 years old, pretending that they're their own age in order to get them, to lure them in. That's that first phase is the recruitment. The second stage of this exploitation cycle is called grooming. And this is where a trafficker builds a relationship with their victim, where they gain their trust, and they often make an emotional connection. And this connection allows the trafficker or pimp to manipulate and control their victim better in the future. And each trafficker has their own style of how they gain that power and the control that's needed in order to manipulate a person to do these awful things. And like in the video we just saw, traffickers can use the grooming process to build a relationship with their victim. If they can get the child to send them explicit images, then this allows for sextortion to take place. Sextortion is a threat to expose these sexual images in order to get a person to do something. So that person already feels shame for having sent these images, like what we even saw in the video. And then now they have fear that this image is going to be seen by others, and they're likely to do whatever it takes to prevent that from happening, even if it's far worse, selling themselves for sex. 85% of victims reported that developing a close they developed a close relationship with their trafficker. And this portrays there are three types of traffickers. One's a Romeo pimp, a guerrilla pimp, and a CEO pimp. The Romeo pimp tactic, where they manipulate and nurture a relationship with their victim. They manipulate their victim into believing that there really is a romantic relationship with them, that this is done by buying the victim gifts, taking them out to eat, spoiling them in some way. And this tactic creates a bond between the victim and the trafficker. And often the victim believes that they are selling themselves because this is how they contribute to that relationship. And the second type of trafficker is referred to as a guerrilla pimp. And these predators use fear and violence to gain control and power over their victims. The victim will do what they're told because they're afraid of what will happen to them. They're afraid of what will happen to their family or even their friends if they don't comply. And so that's the guerrilla pimp. And the last one is the CEO pimp. The CEO pimp is a predator who uses the promise of a job, to manipulate or control their victim. These jobs typically fall into the stardom, into modeling or the music industries. I had done a training, and this gentleman came up to me right after I'd done the training, and he had heard some of these indicators and said he had the same thing happening, where a girl, one of his employees, was telling him that she was quitting because she was moving to Las Vegas because she had met a guy online who was paying for her airline ticket. She had never met him in person, met him online, was going to pay for her airline ticket to give her a job in the modeling industry in Las Vegas. We found out that this guy was a predator, so we stopped that from happening. But this happens quite often, quite frequently as well. So we have recruitment, we have grooming, and then the third phase is being introduced to sex trafficking. And this is when the victim is exploited for the first time. This is referred to as the breaking. And for some, this is very violent, including gang rapes. For others, it may be giving an illicit massage to one of the predator's friends, or like in the video, having sex with one of the predator's friends, because they use shame in order to maintain that control and the power. And this predator now will start using, like turning the tables, where the Romeo pimp will start to introduce violence and fear into that relationship and start calling names and saying, you're just, you're just a whore now. No one's going to believe you. Your family doesn't love you anymore. You're the one committing the crime. So there's this change that happens. And if a recovery of a victim is not made prior to this breaking phase, it becomes much more difficult to recover the victim. The last phase is what's called the automatic and maintenance phases of the cycle, of the sex trafficking cycle. Once a victim has reached this phase, they're basically running on autopilot. They comply to avoid whatever the trafficker has threatened them with. This could include the fear of violence, the fear of their family being harmed, or the feeling that they just don't have worth anymore. And the amount of this extensive, complex trauma associated with this victim now that they have experienced up to this point changes the way that they make decisions. And this is kind of where we hear about the Stockholm syndrome as well. And at this point, the victim has pretty much accepted that this is now their life, and they are simply just in survival mode. And so the use of technology has allowed traffickers to engage with buyers at a much more frequent and widespread capacity. A predator can easily advertise online in various escort sites all around the world. And sometimes they will send their girls to other cities to work there for a few days without fear of the girl ever leaving. So that's why they're in this automatic maintenance phase where the girl's not going to leave. They'll actually send their money back to their trafficker. And then they'll come back when they're done with that in that location. 1 out of every 4 victims surveyed advertised when they were surveyed said that when they were advertised online, they saw more than 10 buyers a day. That is better said that there was 10 rapes a day happening. Imagine the trauma associated with just one unwanted sexual encounter and multiply that by 10 every day. And this trauma compounds over time and continues to keep the victim in this survival mode, where the only things that are important is their safety, doing what the trafficker says from getting hurt again. And traffickers use simple things like food and sleep as control tactics. We have stories that would break your heart if I told you about just that, just how traffickers would use sleep as control tactics. And since this is how innocent kids become victims, this cycle is really important for us to know. We at Guardian Group strive to break this cycle at the beginning stages, so no victim ever experiences this enormous trauma associated with trafficking. But at each stage, there are ways to protect your kids. There are indicators that you can find and help protect people from getting stuck in and caught in this cycle. Because I and everybody in this conference want to get girls out of situations like that. We want to get them back home to their families. There isn't a thing that we wouldn't do to get them out of this mess. We would stay up all night. We have stayed up all night. We want to get them out. And Guardian Group last year alone identified over 150 of these victims. We supported 70 law enforcement sting operations last year that resulted in what we believe it resulted in the identification and the liberation of what we estimate to be the hundreds of victims. It's obvious that no one deserves to be in this situation, to be sold for sex multiple times a night with no escape. And yet, whose responsibility is it to do something about it? And those questions are what bring us together in this conference. And I want to close by sharing something that Pope Francis said in a message titled "No Longer Slaves, but Brothers and Sisters." And this should inspire us. Let us ask ourselves, as individuals and as communities, whether we feel challenged, when in our daily lives we meet or deal with persons who could be victims of human trafficking. Some of us, out of indifference or financial reasons, or because we are caught up in our daily concerns, close our eyes to this. Others, however, decide to do something about this. I applaud you for being a part of this conference. I applaud you for being here because I believe that you want to do something about this. And I really appreciate you letting me share. We have a website that has a lot of great information, a lot of trainings, how you could become a guardian as well. It's just www.guardiangroup.org. And I appreciate you letting me take this time